Hi everyone. Today I want to show you my Happy Easter card from the other day. Just a couple days ago I posted this on YouTube and I did this coloring here with Stampin' Blends. And I wanted to play around with some other coloring techniques with the same image just to show a variety of ways that you can use your Stampin' Up! Products to get the same pretty coloring techniques on your stamped images. This stamp set is from the Spring Mini catalog. And it's called Easter Promise, and I'm using this big crocus here, and there's a small little crocus cluster that you can use too. I used it on the inside, but this is great for coloring. I love any stamp sets that have a nice coloring piece, and this one certainly does, and it's perfect for spring. I've got snow on the ground outside, but I am looking forward to seeing these little crocuses poke through the snow. My neighbor down the street has them, and they just poke right through. I always mean to plant some myself and never quite do. Anyway, but I enjoy seeing hers. So I'm going to do these. I know they come in a variety of colors. They come in like all yellow and all purples and white, but my favorite are the ones down the street like she has, and they are purple on the tips and petals, except as they get closer to the center they turn white, and then that little middle spot there, that I think that's called the stamen, is a bright yellow, and it's very cheery to me. I think it's a really pretty flower. So this one that I did for swaps recently, I used my Stampin' Blends. I think I said that a second ago. So I'm going to show you how to do that in that video. So you're not going to see the Stampin' Blends today. Maybe I'll do one flower. But I'm going to show you a variety of other techniques. So here are my blends. I used Daffodil Delight, Granny Apple Green, Highland Heather, and the Color Lifter to achieve this card in that video. But if you notice, I have those similar colors in my Stampin' Write markers. The only thing I added there was Gorgeous Grape, just because I wanted a little bit of darkness. And then I've got my watercolor pencils. Now these watercolor pencils are Stampin' Up! Exclusive colors, so that's why I like them. I love to color, so I have watercolor pencils from other companies, but I tend to grab my Stampin' Up! Watercolor pencils all the time because I love the coordination in the color. So I know that I can use my Stampin' Up! Watercolor pencils and match my cardstock and my ribbon, and it just gives a really nice effect. So I want to show how to use the watercolor pencils, and there's a variety of ways you can do those. And let's start with the watercolor pencils. So I've got some pre-stamped little images here and a finished flower. And here I just went with straight pencil. So there's no other techniques going on here. I'm just coloring. And how I achieved the different color variations in my purple is I just went over the petal lightly on the first layer. So that's layer one. Now I'm going to show you on the next one, I'm going to do that and layer two. So layer one was very light, then I'm going to go in and press a little harder and add some color depth there. So see, this petal has two layers. I'm going to do the same on this third petal. Now I've got my two layers, but now I'm going to press even harder and get a third layer on there. I'm really creating some different value color changes here just by applying more pressure and more layers. So here you see one layer of color pencil, just a light kind of going over the whole petal. Here I've added some highlights at the tips, a little deeper color, and then I went even deeper along the top and down the sides to really make that petal more rounded. I hope that you can see that. So you got 1, 2, 3. And I just love using colored pencils for this reason. I think they're really fun, and they're kind of easy to bring along with you. You can just bring your little colored pencils in a case and a pencil sharpener. That's important. And just have fun coloring anywhere you go. So I think it's fun to just stamp a bunch of images, and if you have to go somewhere and wait, it's nice to just have them with you if you're in a waiting room or somewhere. Got nothing to do for a little while. It's kind of therapeutic, I think, the colored pencil. Now, you can even, if you want to, go a little bit more and add two colors on top of each other. So I have a granny apple green stem, but I'm adding a little shadow with the garden green underneath where the flower touches the stem. And along one side, this is kind of a small image for that, but and you can get some really interesting coloring and shading with just the pencils. Now the cool thing with these pencils is you can do more. So you can, let me find my colored pencil. Here it is. You can use them on watercolor paper. So here I've used it just on regular Whisper White paper. But if I were to do that same thing, where's my purple? And go on watercolor paper, I could achieve some fun looks as well. So here I am, I'm coloring in my flower. One thing to know with watercolor is the pencil, you're going to lighten it when you add water, so you want to use more than you think you need. So I am going deep with this color. So here I colored in my petals, and then with just an addition of an aqua painter, you can get some pretty watercolor effects this way too, and that is what I've done on this one. So I'm going to add water, and this is nice to bring with you too. See how it's all compact? You've got your water in here. You only need a tiny bit of water. So you bring this and your watercolor pencils and maybe a little bit of paper towel, and that way you can color on the go. So here I'm adding water to my petal, and I'm kind of going from the center up because I want to keep the center lighter and the top darker. So I'm pushing my color upwards. If I had gone down, then I would lose that color variation in my purple. And every once in a while I put the brush on the paper just to get some of the ink off, because I really want to keep that light and dark value change. So here you can see that just adding a little bit of water really gives you a pretty effect. It makes you look like a watercolor artist. Isn't that fun? And again, easy to bring with you. So I really enjoy the watercolor pencils. So here are completed. This is straight pencil, and this is pencil with watercolor. Now on this one, I want to show you how to use your ink pads as a paint. Instead of a ink stamping, you're going to use it as a paint. With this same aqua painter, you're going to stamp, and you can stamp on watercolor paper, and that's what this is. And watercolor paper has a texture to it, so you might want to use your stamp apparatus to make sure you get a nice crisp image. And then you're going to use your brush. Now some people will paint right out of the lid, as you can see that I do. But if you don't want to do that, grab a little block and pick up some ink in your block and use that as a palette. You can paint right off of that, and then your ink will stay, your ink pad will stay nice and clean. I paint constantly, so none of my ink pads are nice and clean, as my Stamp Camp attendees will tell you. Okay, so we're going to color in our image. Kind of the same. You're going to do a light wash like we did with the pencil. If you want to have those color variations, the darks and lights, you want to do a light wash first, and then maybe move on to a different petal. If I were to try to add some dark, you can, but this is ink. It's not quite watercolor paint. It acts a little differently, and it'll kind of bleed into that, and you won't have that drastic light and dark. You can sometimes get a little bit if it's not super wet, but I'm going to move on to another petal just to give myself time to let that first flower dry. And I'm adding, this is Highland Heather. And I'm not using a ton of water, so this is going to dry relatively quickly. By the time I'm done with my light wash over here, I'm going to go and add my dark there. So I'm going to pick up some of my ink on a damp brush, and I'm going to add it to the edges. Now my brush is pretty dry, it looks like. It's not really getting a lot of spread. So I'm going to just give it a little squeeze, get a little bit of water going. Sometimes I like to put it in the pad just to make sure I got no drips. And I can spread that out. You can see I'm getting some light and dark color changes. And sometimes you might want a harsh line, sometimes you don't, so you can blend out your lines if you want. Depends on the look you're going for. Now when you're using water, like I did with the pencil and with this, you want to make sure you're using Stays-On ink because it is not going to smear with water. But if you're using things like Stampin' Blends, or if you're going to use your pencils and not add water, you can use your Memento Black pad. Okay, so here is watercolor on watercolor paper. And then I want to show you, just for fun, you can do something crazy with your watercolor. You can go outside the lines, and this is a little bit messy looking, but I think when I add it to a card with a frame or something, it'll look interesting. So I just want to try it. It's fun to play around with watercolor. What I did here was I just kind of was a little bit fast and messy and loose, and then once you've got it, just to add more depth of color, you can go back in and add, you know, more dark. What happens is it tends to bleed out, and all the colors kind of tend to look the same, so you can add a little bit of more dark green perhaps. And I made sure to not touch my purple and yellow, kind of get to know what happens when colors mix. Purple and yellow mixed together are going to make kind of an ugly, muddy, grayish brown color. Colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, if you can picture a color wheel in your mind, are going to make a browny, muddy color. So I left a little space, and white space is kind of fun in watercolor. And for a crocus, it's perfect because there is white space. So that's another fun way to color. Now I also want to show you how, if you have Stampin' Write markers, which is the first thing that Stampin' Up sold as far as coloring tools, we had these markers, and they're great because with markers you can take your marker and just color directly onto a stamp, and that way you can get like a purple happy and a green Easter or whatever. You can do the whole thing. You can have fun coloring directly onto a stamp, which you can't do with Stampin' Blends because they're permanent ink, whereas this is a water soluble, so you can go ahead and color it up, and then it'll clean right off. But it doesn't color the same when you're using it on your images, because a Stampin' Blend, you can get those darks and lights to blend together. And I'm going to try and show you how I've got some dark tips here and different darks and lights, but they're not a soft, smooth transition as you get with the blend. Here's a blend, and here is a Stampin' Write marker. So let me show you how to get, so even though I'm just using a marker, I do have some darks and lights. See here, I've got lighter towards the bottom, and then it gets darker at the tip, and I just want to show you how to achieve that. With the marker, you want to not go over it too much. Did I grab Gorgeous Grape? I did. That's my dark. Ah! Luckily, I stamped this many times. Highland Heather. You want to just go over the whole petal. And you can see where I overlapped at the tip. It's darker, and you've got darker there. So you want to try to avoid that as much as possible if you want light down at the bottom. But I know I want dark at the tip. So then I'm going to add a second layer. See how I'm getting? So now I've got light and dark, and you can go back, let that dry for just a second, and add yet a third layer. So I've got kind of 3 colors going with just my Highland Heather Stampin' Write marker. So it's not going to blend as smoothly, because if I was trying to go over that, the line between the medium and the light, if I were to try to go over that, it's just going to turn into dark, and you won't have the color variation. So you have to kind of work purposefully. There's a light layer, and then a second layer, third layer at the tips. You can even go fourth layer. And if you want to, you can grab your next darkest marker color. This is gorgeous, great. And just add in some of these little lines if you feel like they're necessary. I don't know that it's always necessary. So I've got some interesting color changes with just a Stampin' Write marker. So if you don't have the blends, if you feel the blends are not in your budget right now, but you do have markers, because we've had markers for a long time and you can get them pretty economically in a set of color family, use the markers and still do these color techniques and try to get some color variation. It's kind of a prettier look than just doing a flat marker. Okay, so what did I do? I did markers. Here's my markers. I did watercolor on watercolor paper. Here's a watercolor. I want to point out that you can actually watercolor on shimmery white. Shimmery white paper has like a coating to make it shimmery. You can't see shimmer in the video, but it has these little speckles of shimmer. It's really pretty paper. It's got a slight gloss to it. You can kind of feel the smoothness. So I think that whatever they put on the shimmer with, it allows the paper to not warp or pill or get destroyed when you add water. So you can use shimmery white cardstock to watercolor on, and I use it kind of all the time because I really like the smoothness, and it's a little more white than the watercolor paper, and it's lighter and easier to use sometimes on a card. So you have to kind of play with what works best for you, and I love the little shimmer in there, and I wish you could see it. So this is the same technique on watercolor paper and on shimmery white paper. So you've got a lot of fun that you can do. And then here's watercolor with the watercolor pencils. So many different things. And here are watercolor pencils with nothing added. Oh, there's a fourth watercolor pencil I want to show you. Let's see if I'll do it with this one that we started. So Stampin' Up! Also sells something called a blender pen. Now this is a clear, and I think someone told me there's some kind of glycerin mix in here. It's not alcohol, it's, anyway, it's a clear kind of marker. And you don't need one for every color. So what you're going to do is it doesn't pick up, I mean, it picks up, my tip is a little purple because I used it yesterday, but notice it's not putting more purple on the paper. So you can just, when you're done using it with one color, just kind of get it off. Here's where I got it off there before. Get it off your tip and go on to the next color. So I'm going to blend this out, show you the before. I'll blend out the middle one, and then you can kind of see the difference. You're just going to go and smooth out. Now what it's going to do is it's going to pick up some of that pigment and move it around a little bit, and it'll smooth out your pencil lines. I don't know if you can see. Now, I was pretty good with my pencil lines anyway, so I don't know that it makes a lot of difference on mine. You can even pick up pigment, I don't know if you can see that, and color with it and get a nice little soft shadow. You can put a shadow around with the blender pen because it's so soft. But here I just kind of smoothed out my watercolor pencils, and so you can do that. Another thing you can do with the blender pen is you can use it to pick up ink from your lid, and you can color with it. So if you've got no markers but you want to color in an image, just buy a blender pen. And I'm going right from my ink pad, and I'm coloring in these stems. And that's a really fun way to color, and it's a softer look than a marker because the glycerin kind of smooths it out and kind of mushes it in. And it's a nice little pen. It's kind of fun. So maybe grab a blender pen and play around with that with your ink, or play around with it with your watercolor pencils. And so take a look in the catalog. Look at all the coloring tools and look for blender pen, look at aqua painters, and check out the colored pencils. They're really nice. I really like them, and I hope that you like them. I hope you'll check them out. And of course, I love the blends. On the first video, you can go back if you want to see the Stampin' blends. They are nice, and if they're in your budget, grab them. They're a great coloring medium. They're fun to work with. But I think on the go pencils are super great. And of course, markers and ink. Got to have your stamps and ink, right? Those are our main staples, our inks. So everybody has a lot of the ink colors. So if you have ink colors and you don't have the budget for extra things, then use your ink pads with an aqua painter or a blender pen. These come in a box set of 3, and like I said, you don't need one for every color, because you used it with the purple, I used it with the green, cleaned it off, and then I went and picked up another color. So I hope that this was useful, and I hope that you'll check out the coloring mediums. Let me know in the comments if you have any further questions about coloring. I'd be happy to answer them, and I hope that you'll come back and check out some more videos. Thanks. Bye.